realize that you're going to get butter on the paper if you're working on your script at the popcorn counter?
But that's why I write in pencil, because it doesn't smudge, whereas ink will just smear everywhere.
Yeah, but
so this is one of the many reasons why I prefer pencil. It's that, and also it reminds me of being in like primary school, writing in pencil.
But why would you write at the popcorn counter? You do this at home. Don't you write at home?
Like you, I am writing everywhere all the time. I literally went to the cafe this morning to go and do some writing. Just getting out of the house, isn't it? Walking around, I think it gets your brain going. And also, if you go out to write, then you can't start doing laundry or washing up or tidying the front room or anything like that.
That's true.
You've got to write and do nothing else.
Yes.
Where do you do your writing?
Oh boy, where do I do my writing? Well, I think, you alluded to like the idea of getting out. I mean, I don't remember anything anymore, so I usually have some kind of notepad where I write stuff down, ideas and such. My actual writing probably mostly happens, I try to stand up as much as I can. So I've got this standing up setting, because that does mean that I'm moving a little bit. When I sit, I don't like that, because I just feel like I'm hurting my shoulders and hurting my back, and so it's better for me to stand up. But I guess I write mostly at home. I've never been the person who goes to the coffee shop and writes there, in part because I think I would just be drinking coffee and going into the bathroom the whole time and getting distracted watching people. But also I just I kind of need to be alone. I need more alone time to write. So it's probably not so much place and more some solitude, I guess. Yeah.
Solitude.
It's usually somewhere.
I thought I'd bring it up because I was having a conversation with a friend at work. This was last week. People are often kind of intrigued. Is what you're writing? How? But the thing that people often ask, I don't know whether you get the same thing. People ask two questions, don't they? They say, where do you get your ideas from? And you always have to explain. I have like a standard answer to that, which is, everybody's got loads of ideas. Look out the window; there are ideas right there. Open a newspaper, you'll see a dozen ideas. Ideas are everywhere. Yep. And I say, if you go out into the street and you just throw a stone randomly out until you hit a person, and ask that person, "Hey, have you got an idea for a movie?" 50% of the time they will have. Yeah. Everybody's got an idea for a movie. Yeah. But having that idea is not the challenge. It's getting that idea and then turning it into a 120-page script. That is exactly that is the part that I think most people have no idea how to start. And certainly when I first became interested in writing for the screen, I didn't really understand how to. I had as I'm sure you do, a notebook full of little ideas, but turning one of those ideas into a 120-page document seemed like an insurmountable cliff face. Yeah. What is the? Because I think I know the answer to this. This is a rhetorical question. Okay. Because and I think your answer is the answer then that I largely stole from you and uses my own method. But what is your method of turning that one great idea that you got by stealing from somebody that you'd thrown a stone at, and turn it into a 120-page script? How does the process work for you?
I think if it's a rhetorical question, I don't have to answer it, right? That's the point of the rhetorical question?
Yeah, absolutely. That just means then that I then go on to answer it for you, which is completely not what I intended.
I usually write down every idea, however shite it might be, and then they're all like friends of different nagging ability, I guess. Like some of them, the ideas just sit on that file or in that notebook forever. But the ones who are really nagging me a lot and saying, come back to me, think about me some more, those are the ones that sort of distill bit by bit into, I write a treatment paragraph at the very least, and then those little scraps of paper I was talking to you about. I'm really a firm believer in, if not act structure, at least just writing down the classic napkin kind of pitch of just 3 ideas, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So I definitely do all that. And then for me, because I'm writing more and more theater, I'm always deciding, I'll let an idea sit for a little while, and then I say, is this a picture thing? Is this a film? Is this theater? Is this something that I can satisfy myself with a haiku even, or just a short poem or something like that, just to get rid of it and be done with it? So I really have to decide what medium I'm writing for. And recently I got an idea for a musical, so now I'm concerned with a musical. I need to learn how to write that. But ultimately they all have some sort of beginning, middle, end structure. So I think I start with that and then start building it up, and I just see which one occupies my mind well and my time well and gets onto a page. So normally it's ultimately going to be a project if I've gotten a longer treatment of 3 to 5 pages, 5 to 10 pages, however long it is. And that way I realize, okay, there's more depth to it. If it's just a great idea, I've got lots of little things that I think are great ideas, but I'd never go back to them because, they might be an element of a story, or a character in a story, but they're not the whole story. So it's really defining the medium that story or that idea is best going to develop in. I think that's the trickiest part. And I see a lot of people who make films that should be plays or plays that should be films. So the first step for me is really deciding how is this idea best portrayed. Yeah.
I wrote an interesting point. I wrote an audio drama. It's about 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it mainly sprung from the necessity to write something that could actually, fairly easily be recorded and made.
Yeah.
So I had a few ideas kicking around, and I was thinking, it'd be fun to do an audio drama. And I know enough actors that I could, gather a few people together and stand around a microphone, and
yeah.
And so I ended up writing. It was like a sort of 60-minute audio drama. Had a couple of friends came round, give them a few quid and a nice lunch, and we spent a Sunday just kind of recording this hour of drama. But the only way I could write it out in a way that made sense to me was as a film script. That's kind of the only way that my brain works. So I ended up writing all the dialogue as a film script, and then ended up writing all the sound effects as stage directions. And had to put it down in that format, but it still works fine, actually.
Yeah.
I tend to develop ideas with a spider diagram. So I, like you, have loads of different little ideas and little snippets and things like that in a notebook. And at the moment, I keep most of them on a file on my phone. And during an idle moment, I will just sort of skim through them and think, well, what's going on? What did I write down? What was that? And it's the ones, that keep coming back to you. Yeah. I will develop them with a spider diagram. So just get a big sheet of A4 paper or A3 and just kind of write down, as many associated ideas as I can, and ask questions and see whether I can just fill in enough space on that A3 or A4 sheet that it's starting to look like there's a little bit of substance there. And from there, I go to, this is the idea that you taught me, a beat sheet.
Yeah, the beat sheets. Yeah, absolutely.
This I think is the crux of writing for the screen, at least. Which is trying to fit it onto 40 Post-it notes.
Yeah.
And it has to be exactly 40. Mm-hmm. And if I end up writing 38 Post-it notes, there's not enough story. And if I write 45 Post-it notes, there's too much and things need to be dropped.
Yeah.
I try and get the discipline of writing exactly 40.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I used to write film reviews for a website called Film Exposed. Doesn't exist anymore. And they used to say, we want reviews of about 500 words. And I used to pride myself on writing exactly 500 words, not 501 and not 499. And I think it really tightens up your writing when you pay very close attention to these absolute details, because then you end up wavering over every single adjective.
Yeah.
You kind of think, I don't need that. Oh, okay, I don't need that. And get it down to exactly 500. And it's the same with writing a story for the screen, I think. I try and get it down to exactly 40 Post-it notes.
Yeah.
And so, if there's not enough, then either I need another character or I need to have a little bit more action, a scene, so maybe it ends up spreading over 2 Post-it notes.
Yeah.
And not uncommonly, I'll go from the spider diagram to about 8 Post-it notes, and I'll have an idea for the first 2 or 3 scenes, and then something in the middle, or something over here, something towards the end, something which is a bit of a reversal or a surprise, and I'll put them on the board roughly where I think they could happen.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of filling in the gaps, basically, kind of thinking, okay, I need some story here, at the end of the first act, and I need some story, to cover most of this end of the second act, and then I need a lead in for the third act, and all the other bits are already covered. And you just slowly fill in the gaps and the spaces.
Yep. And you build up to that. That's definitely, it makes it a process. I love the board, and there's some steps that I often take before I get to the board, which would be sometimes I do the fairy tale thing. Once upon a time, there was you're establishing what's your story world, and there was who's the character, who knew this person, and then this happened, and you're ultimately building up to live happily ever after, that sort of thing, or whatever your conclusion's going to be. So that's a nice way to get a story that you can actually tell people pretty quickly. If you memorize that, you can sort of pitch it to people and get a little bit of feedback just to see if it's even remotely interesting. And then I think we're both fans of Blake Snyder's stuff, so the board really comes from Blake Snyder. But he has sort of longer form, and depending on different genres, he has longer form, sort of the key beats that are usually maybe 10 or 15 kind of things that certainly happen at certain pages in the classically successful scripts, I guess. So I'm a big fan of Blake Snyder. I think his books have really just changed my approach and simplified it too. I mean, it really makes it kind of nice. But there's a right next to me. I could show it to you on video right now. I've got a board right now for one of my scripts right here. So it's just a manila folder with 40 different sticky notes forced in there. And yeah, you're right. If you're missing stuff, it's not complete. If you've got too much, that's a pretty good indication that you've simply got too much. So I think it's really getting an idea that's not too grand, something that you can really expand or shrink if you need to. But it has to hit this certain weight. Otherwise, if it's not heavy enough, it's not going to support a feature film. I never do a board for a play, ironically, because I think it's just so much more about dialogue. But you probably could do a board for a play as well. And then just to kind of detail the board a little bit, you've got 4 rows with 10 of the stickies each. And so it's sort of like Act 1 is 1 row going across, and then Act 2A with a midpoint is their second row, Act 2B for the third row, and then the fourth row is the third act. That's sort of the traditional board. So it just allows you to sort of really think in. I think the big problem with screenwriting is if you think of in the full 90 minutes or the full 120 minutes, that's way too hard to comprehend. You've got to break it down into smaller pieces. So why not break it into 4 different act sequences? Makes it a little easier to imagine how the story is going to go. And the writing is usually that's the bulk of it, isn't it? I mean, I spend a lot of time developing an outline or developing a treatment or putting the whole thing in prose first and then coming back and introducing it into the screenplay templates. But there just comes a point where you just got to sit down at the typewriter or at the computer and write, or you're writing right here at the popcorn counter with pencil and paper, well, buttery kind of paper. So you just have to sit down and write it. But I think it's really important to get away from it once in a while. And I think, just get out of your comfort zone a little bit, go for a walk or go do something totally different. Because if you're just sitting there writing all the time, it's just going to get redundant, I think, and boring.
I mean, we talked about this when we were talking about 1970s Hollywood, about how there's this famous story that Paul Schrader wrote the script for Taxi Driver in a weekend. And I think if you've done your beat sheet, if you've done all your kind of homework, actually it's perfectly plausible that you might sit down and type out a 120-page script over a weekend because you've done all the homework. You're ready. Yeah. I mean, it surprises me how often people talk about the challenge of writing good dialogue, whereas I feel... I spent a lot of time talking to myself. As Rachel often notes, when I come out of the shower, she says, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "I'm talking to myself, darling, of course, like I always do." I spent a lot of time talking to myself, and I find writing the dialogue, I'm not going to pretend to be the world's greatest dialogue writer, but I find dialogue very easy to write because I'm basically just talking to myself as we go through the story, and I find that it just pours straight out of me.
Yeah.
Writing dialogue is 10% of the screenwriter's work, and by far the biggest chunk of sweat comes from trying to get that beat sheet and distilling down the story and figuring out what elements do I need, what can I throw away, what has to happen, what can afford to happen off screen, what do I need to see, what do I need to show, what do I need to tell people. That's the hard bit. Once those 40 little post-it notes have got something in place, then the rest of it, comes pretty quickly.
I agree. Yeah, it's I think it's that's the bulk of the work, really. But I think it's really important I would not start writing a project until I've got a board or until I've got a treatment that's pretty developed, because you're wasting your time, because you will spend a lot of time at the computer without knowing where you're going. I think it's pretty important to have it. It's not the final say, it's not the final draft, but to even write that first draft, I really want to know each of those 40 cards, I want to know them well, and I want to know that they're going to work at least to get me through the first draft. And then you go back and refine it. But I wouldn't start writing a project until I'm pretty ready, when oh God, who was it? Tony Grisoni? Tony Grisoni came in and talked to us, and he said that he just sort of starts writing, and then, was it Tony Grisoni or was it Hanif Qureshi? One of those guys came, I think it was Tony, came in and just said he starts writing at page 1 and then stops when he's going to stop or something like that. Well, that's a luxury. I guess you could do that, but I couldn't do that. It's just it would be too wandering. I think I need the structure. I need the organization before I'm even going to start actually typing up the script.
I have a friend who's a novelist, and he does exactly that. He sits down and writes page one,
I think so.
And just kind of keeps going and investigates the story as he goes and just tries to figure out the next page and then the next page and then the next page. And I agree, I just cannot function like that.
Yeah.
I've written scripts before with directors who have said, send me the pages.
Yeah.
How much did you write today? Send me the pages. Send me another 5 pages on Wednesday. And I just cannot work like that because I know as I'm going through, if I'm writing 1 page at a time, then I don't know where I'm going or how it's going to work, and I'll inevitably come back and then have to correct them and change them and rewrite them. Whereas once you get your beat sheet worked out, you can write all of the pages in pretty much one big go.
Yeah.
And then you may end up coming back to it and then deciding, actually, this is too wordy. We can lose that. We can lose this. And not seldom I come up with ideas for gags and callbacks and interesting ideas where I think, okay, I need to seed that 30 pages earlier.
Yeah, good point.
And I've only figured that gag out as I am writing it because the dialogue is the last thing that comes up.
Yeah.
So you need to then sort of go back and add in preparation to pay off the gag 30 pages later.
Yeah.
I do that quite a lot. It's going through the little fine detail.
Yeah.
But the fine detail is easy and fun to work with, and it's the very big beats are the challenging part.
I think we've both.
Do you ever?
Go ahead.
Do you ever write dialogue by listening to people? Do you listen to people on the bus or in the street or in the cafe?
I do. It's not often that I steal anything verbatim, but the way that a person talks, or maybe some of the language they use, or listen for accents to see how things sound. Certainly, but I think, like you, I've stumbled on this idea of I'm going to write the dialogue is going to be the last thing I do. So I usually have all my pictures, all my images set up, and it also it sort of pigeonholes you a little bit because when you've set something up, there's not like this infinite variety of words that you can put into people's mouths at that point, right? I mean, it's fairly specific what you need to put into a conversation, unless everything's really told through for the images. I mean. So essentially what I'm working with is kind of what I see as a silent film in the treatment or on the board, and then I get all that in there, and then I go back and write the dialogue after that. I mean, I've got an idea. There's some certain lines that absolutely they're so massively wonderful that I have to put them in there, and I know that that's going to happen. But generally, it's the last thing I write.
I remember reading a interview with Christopher Nolan's brother. What's he called?
Maybe his last...
Jonathan Nolan, isn't it?
I was going to guess Nolan for sure. So
Nolan. I think he was kind of writing the script, or he's talking in this interview about writing the script for, I don't know whether it was The Dark Knight or maybe it was Batman Begins. And he was saying that he and his brother spent a long time figuring out what the story was and how the beats would work. And then Jonathan took all that sort of beat sheet away and then spent 3 months writing the script. And I remember listening to this interview thinking, how did you stretch that out to 3 months if you already knew what every scene was and what was going to happen in every scene? How slowly were you writing? This is that's a week's work, not 3 months. You're pulling a fast one there, buddy. But that bit with the dialogue, it's quick and straightforward. There's one other question which my friend asked me last week when we were talking about it. He was saying, do I prefer to write projects that are my own ideas, or do I prefer to write projects that are commissioned from somebody else? And I told him, and I think I agree, having thought about it for a while, I think I would generally prefer to work on somebody else's idea for the simple fact that when I'm writing a spec script, I get an idea and I think this is dynamite, this is great fun, look at this is brilliant. I have no idea whether anyone else in the world will think it's interesting. In the same way that when you're a comedian, I would come up with gags that I thought was funny, but I would have no idea whether an audience would laugh until you go to the club and you tell the gag. And there are some things that I think is funny which are not funny to anyone else in the world. And it's the same with scripts. There are some things that I like, no one else likes them. At least when you're starting with somebody else's idea, if someone commissions you to write a script, you know that at least two people are interested in it. There's the person who suggested it, and then there's me.
Yeah.
So I've already doubled the potential audience. So I given the chance, I often would prefer to work on somebody else's idea, because at least it feels like it's going somewhere.
Yeah.
But do you find the same thing?
I've had so little experience with other people's material. I guess I think it's great when someone, especially someone who's a little bit connected, comes to you with an idea, because then you think, okay, there's at least some momentum behind this, as opposed to me just generating something on my own and then working on it in isolation for a long period of time. When Zesis brought the Maryland thing to me, I thought, this is great. It's something I would never have come up with myself. I never would have written this, but it's kind of in my wheelhouse. And then I started doing more and more research on it, and I had a lot of research that he had done too, and I loved writing that script. So I think there's a certain liberation where you're not hampered by your own ideas, and you're not working in isolation that helps in the process of a commission thing. I've written some short scripts for another person, which were, again, very interesting, but then I kind of wanted to make them my own. I eventually felt like, I want this to be more like my signature on this thing. And maybe that's...
Don't want to give it back. It's my baby now.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not serving the client so well. But I guess I've had mixed experiences in that way. I think for me, I mostly like to just write on my own projects, because I want to do original stuff. And not that my stuff is wildly original or anything like that, but it's just something that I know that I'm not going to see otherwise. No one else is going to come up with it, I don't think, or something exactly like it. Obviously, there's not that much variety in all scripts, but I like to think that I can do something original. But boy, I would love to have more people come to me with projects. It can be a very good experience, and yeah, again, if it is supposed to be a collaborative process, and so much of the actual writing is not. It's someone has to sit down and tap keys. That's what it ultimately comes down to, and.
It's tapping keys, isn't it? Yeah, I was going to say it's applying your bottom to the seat, but actually you don't do that. You apply your feet to the floor, don't you? But it's tapping the keys is the important bit.
That's the common denominator, is tapping them keys. So that's going to be alone. But I do like the idea of if someone else is really also invested, that's going to make my interest in it that much stronger, I think.
So it's Save the Cat. It's the book you would tell everyone to read. I would. I mean, I've had this conversation with a few people. I'd tell them read Save the Cat.
It's readable.
Yeah, don't necessarily adhere to its slavishry, but it's it's a great place
to kick off, and it really gives you actionable steps. That's the other thing and it's a little bit diversified for dramas too. It's like it's customized for the various genres of film. So he's got a slightly different template for a horror film than he would for a character study or a drama or an action film. So it's good. It's good reading. Save the Cat, and I think there's a Save the Cat 2 or Save the Cat Again or Save the Cat Goes to Hollywood, or he's got a number of Save the Cat books. So if you look up Blake Snyder and Save the Cat, probably the best resources. Yeah,
I'm glad we've talked about writing sophisticated scripts, because now we're about to go and see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Which I think, come on, what? That script is like 30 years in the writing, no?
So it must be good. It's bound to be. It's impossible for it to be bad, I think.
Yes.
Right, I've eaten enough popcorn. We should go and see it. Should we go and
fold up your paper carefully and use a napkin. There's a little bit of butter
right there. It's sticky now. It's sticky. I regret this.